I woke up inside a sealed tomb, and the first thing I heard was not my own breathing, but a second heartbeat answering from somewhere beneath the stone. Cold pressed against my back. Not mattress cold, not winter morning cold, but deep underground cold, the kind that seemed to have waited centuries just to crawl into my bones. My eyes opened to darkness broken by thin blue candlelight, and for one terrible second I could not remember my name, my room, or why my hands were tied with silver cord against my chest. The air smelled like dust, old roses, melted wax, and something ancient that made my Omega instincts curl inward with panic. Omega. The word slammed into my mind before I understood it. I was not in my body. My wrists were smaller. My frame was lighter. My breathing came too fast, too soft, too frightened. I tried to sit up, but the silver cords tightened with a quiet magical hum. Not cutting, not cruel in any obvious way, just firm enough to remind me that someone had placed me here and expected me to stay. Outside the stone door, voices chanted in slow, formal rhythm. Men and women speaking with calm devotion, as if they were not sealing a living person into the dark. May the offering soothe the royal curse. May the Omega carry peace into the king's rest. May Northmere remain protected until dawn. Offering. My stomach turned. Memories crashed into me so violently that I had to squeeze my eyes shut. A palace corridor lit by white lamps. Servants looking away as I passed. A council elder measuring my wrist with a silver chain. Lord Victor Hayes smiling like pity and ownership were the same thing. A name whispered over and over until it became mine. Caleb Miller, 23 years old. Palace Omega. Orphan. Raised under royal protection. Prepared for sacred duty. No, not duty. Burial. My breath broke in my throat. I knew this world. Not from living in it. Not until this impossible moment. But from a novel I had read in my own world while sitting on my couch with a cheap blanket over my knees and rain tapping against the window. Northmere. The sealed throne. The royal curse. Alpha King Julian Blackwood, the dead king whose tomb had become the center of a yearly ritual, and the Omega offering accepted before dawn. That was all the book had said about this body. One sentence. One disposable line used to prove the council was desperate enough to feed old magic whatever it asked for. I had become that sentence. The stone beneath me was not a bed. It was a ritual slab covered in faded moonrose carvings. I wore a long white ceremonial robe with silver thread at the sleeves, beautiful in the way a farewell gift might be beautiful. My throat tightened. They had dressed me like something precious only because they had already decided I was not meant to walk back out. I forced myself to turn my head. The tomb was larger than I expected, carved from black stone with tall pillars fading into shadow. Blue candles burned in iron stands. White flowers lay in careful circles around the floor, their petals already wilting in the cold. At the center of the chamber rested a massive stone coffin, wider than a doorway, engraved with a crown, a wolf, and a ring of moon roses. Alpha King Julian Blackwood, dead for 7 years, according to the world outside. Cold, silent, buried with his armor and the kingdom's grief. But the second heartbeat came from there. I heard it again. Slow, deep, waiting. My own heart answered so hard my chest ached. No, I whispered, though I did not know whether I was denying the tomb, the book, or the terrifying hope rising under my fear. The chanting outside grew louder. The ritual was not over. Dawn must have been close. In the story, the offering was accepted before dawn, and the tomb stayed sealed for another year. Accepted. Such a clean word for never returning. My fingers trembled as I pulled against the silver cord. The magic hummed, and a mark on my left wrist warmed in warning. More memories surfaced. Victor's voice. Do not fear, Caleb. A useful Omega is never forgotten by history. I almost laughed, but it came out as a shaking breath. History had already forgotten me. The book had barely bothered to mention my death. Something shifted inside the coffin. Not loud, not dramatic, just a faint scrape beneath stone, followed by that slow heartbeat growing stronger. My lungs refused to draw air. Every instinct in this borrowed body screamed danger, alpha, power, run, but there was nowhere to run inside a sealed tomb. I rolled onto my side and pushed myself off the slab. My knees hit the floor, weak from fear, but I stayed upright. The stone was so cold it burned through the thin robe. Step by step, I moved toward the coffin, dragging the silver cord with me. The closer I came, the more the air changed. Beneath the dust and candle smoke, there was another scent. Winter cedar, dark earth after rain, a faint trace of smoke, controlled and lonely. It should have frightened me. It did frighten me. But underneath the fear, something in my chest loosened like it recognized a song I had forgotten. I reached the coffin and placed both bound hands on the carved lid. Warm, not hot, not lifelessly cold. Warm, like someone sleeping beneath a heavy blanket of stone. My mouth went dry. "You are not dead," I whispered. The moment the words left me, the mark on my wrist flared. A tiny line of red opened across my palm where the silver cord had pressed too tightly. One drop fell onto the moonrose carving. The entire tomb inhaled. Blue candles turned silver all at once. The stone coffin trembled under my hands. The chanting outside faltered, then stopped. My breath caught somewhere between terror and disbelief as the carved lid shifted a single inch from within. Then a voice came from under the stone, rough, deep, and impossibly alive. "Mate." My knees nearly gave out. The dead king was breathing. And somehow, in a world that had locked me inside a grave before asking my name, he had woken knowing exactly what to call me. The word did not echo like the chanting outside had. It sank directly into my chest, quiet and certain, as if the stone, the candles, and every hidden carving in the tomb had been waiting years to hear it spoken. "Mate." My body froze with both hands still pressed against the coffin lid, silver cord cutting softly across my wrists, one tiny drop of blood glowing on the moonrose symbol beneath my palm. I wanted to pull away. I wanted to deny it. I wanted to tell the voice under the stone that I was not anyone's mate, not anyone's offering, not anyone's answer to a curse I had never agreed to carry. But my throat had gone so dry that even breathing felt like swallowing dust. The coffin shifted again, only an inch, but enough for cold silver light to spill from the gap. Beneath it came that scent again, winter cedar, rain-dark earth, and smoke held under impossible control. My Omega instincts trembled, not because the scent was harsh, but because it felt familiar in a way this borrowed body did not know how to explain. Familiar was more frightening than danger. Danger made sense. Familiarity inside a grave did not. Outside the stone door, the chanting had stopped completely. For a moment, all I could hear was my heartbeat, the second heartbeat beneath the coffin lid, and the faint scrape of robes beyond the sealed entrance as the council realized the ritual had not followed their script. A man's voice rose outside, sharper than the others. "Lord Victor Hayes." I recognized him before the memory arrived. "Continue the prayer. The offering must settle before dawn." Offering. The word opened another door inside my head, and the old Caleb Miller's life poured through like cold water. I saw a child sitting alone at the end of a palace dining table, too small for the chair, eating bread that had gone stiff at the edges while servants spoke around him instead of to him. I saw Victor kneeling before that child with a soft smile, saying, "The palace protects special Omegas." I saw years of white rooms, silver lessons, scent testing, and prayers repeated until the words became chains. Caleb had been told he was fortunate. Fortunate to be fed. Fortunate to be clothed. Fortunate to serve a sacred purpose when other orphans simply disappeared into the lower city. Every kindness came with a hook hidden inside it. Every gift taught him to say thank you for being kept close to the place that would one day bury him. My hands shook harder. This body remembered gratitude as survival. It remembered lowering its eyes when nobles called him Grave Omega. It remembered smiling when palace women adjusted the white ceremonial robe against his shoulders and whispered that he looked peaceful, as if peace were something you could dress a person in before sealing a door. My chest tightened until my next breath came broken. The palace had not raised Caleb to live. It had preserved him until he became useful enough to spend. The silver cord around my wrists pulsed, and a mark beneath the fabric of my sleeve warmed in warning. I looked down and pushed the loose cuff back with shaking fingers. There, burned into the inside of my wrist, was a pale ritual mark shaped like a crescent wrapped around a thorn. Another memory answered. Victor's voice during the final preparation. "This mark will guide you if fear confuses you. If you leave the tomb before dawn, it will return you to your purpose." Return me. My stomach turned. Even if I found a door, even if the stone opened, the ritual would drag this body back until the offering was accepted. The novel had called that acceptance. Now I understood it meant the magic would consume Caleb's freedom while the court washed its hands and called the result protection. I pressed my injured palm closer to the coffin lid, partly to steady myself and partly because the warmth beneath the stone was the only thing in this chamber that felt honest. "I cannot be your mate," I whispered. My voice sounded too small for the tomb. "I do not even know if this life is mine." The heartbeat beneath the stone grew stronger. The gap widened another fraction, and through it I saw the edge of black armor, ancient but spotless, as if time had bent around the body inside instead of touching it. The voice came again, rougher now, shaped by long silence. "You are afraid." I almost laughed because the answer was too obvious. I woke up tied inside a tomb. A pause. Then, impossibly, the dead king said, "Then they have used you as they used me." The word stopped me. Outside, Victor's voice rose in controlled anger, ordering the prayer to begin again, but the council's rhythm had broken. Some were frightened. I could hear it in the uneven steps, the lower whispers, the sudden uncertainty of people who had believed a sealed door meant power. Inside the tomb, the moonrose carvings brightened beneath my blood, revealing lines of script around the coffin that had been invisible before. I could not read the language fully, but the meaning pressed into my mind through the mark and the bond waking between us. Not death, not rest, binding, silence, royal authority stolen under false mourning. My breath caught. "This is not a tomb," I said slowly. The realization moved through me like ice cracking across a lake. "It is a cage." The man beneath the stone exhaled, and the sound carried 7 years of waiting. Yes, another memory from the book twisted into something new. Alpha King Julian Blackwood had not died from the royal curse. The history everyone believed was not history at all. It was a cover placed over a living king, and I had been sent here not to comfort the dead, but to keep the living buried. My knees weakened, and I had to lean against the coffin to stay upright. If the council had lied about Julian, then they had lied about everything. About the ritual, about Caleb's purpose, about the sacred duty that was supposed to make being sacrificed sound noble. The silver cord tightened again as the prayer outside restarted, rougher and faster now. The mark on my wrist burned, pulling me backward toward the ritual slab. Panic surged through my chest. I grabbed the coffin edge with both hands. "I do not want to die here," I said, and the confession tore out of me before pride could stop it. The stone under my palms warmed. From inside the coffin, Julian's voice dropped lower, still weak, but suddenly filled with command. "Then do not let them name surrender as duty." The words struck the part of me that had been shaking since I opened my eyes. I had spent these first minutes believing I had fallen into someone else's ending, a tiny sentence already written and sealed. But the heartbeat under the stone was real. The king was real. The lie was real. And if the palace had raised this body to be buried, then maybe surviving began with refusing the first name they gave me. The prayer outside the stone door grew louder, and with every line, the ritual mark on my wrist pulled harder. It did not drag me across the floor like a hand would, but it made my bones remember obedience. My knees turned weak. My shoulders bent forward. The silver cord around. My wrists hummed as if it were pleased to see fear doing its work. I gripped the edge of the coffin until my fingers ached, refusing to let my body return to the ritual slab. Not again. Not when I had finally understood the truth beneath the beautiful lie. This chamber was not a resting place. It was a prison dressed as mourning. The candles, the flowers, the white robe, the solemn voices outside, all of it had been arranged to make a cage look holy. My breath shook in the cold air. "How do I open it?" I whispered. The coffin lid shifted beneath my palms, but not enough. Julian Blackwood was awake, alive, and still trapped under stone carved with stolen prayers. His voice came through the narrow gap, low and rough from years of silence. "Find the royal seal near the foot of the coffin." The traitors would have hidden the binding there. Traitors. The word should have sounded dramatic, like something from the fantasy novel I remembered reading in another world. Inside the tomb, it sounded practical. Ordinary. As if betrayal had been built into the walls one careful rune at a time. I forced myself to move along the side of the coffin, dragging the silver cord with me. The tomb floor was carved in circles of script, some glowing faintly silver where my blood scent had touched the air, others remaining dull blue under the prayer outside. I could not read the language, not fully, but my mind caught fragments through this body's memory and something deeper, something that pulsed between me and the king beneath stone. Silence the crown. Bind the breath. Use the offering. Renew before dawn. My stomach twisted so sharply I had to stop. It says offering, I whispered. It says my blood renews the seal. Julian was quiet for one heartbeat too long. Then you were never meant to soothe the curse. My throat closed. I was meant to keep you trapped. Saying it made the room feel smaller. The old Caleb's memories pressed against mine. Victor Hayes touching my shoulder in the palace chapel, telling me I had been chosen for a sacred honor. Servants bathing my hands in rose water. A councilwoman fastening the white robe with tears in her eyes that looked rehearsed. Everyone had known enough to look sad. No one had known enough to stop it. Or maybe they had. Maybe that was worse. At the foot of the coffin, I found the royal seal. It was not placed proudly where a king's symbol should be. It was hidden beneath a layer of black wax, almost invisible until the silver candlelight caught its edge. I scraped at it with shaking fingers, and the wax flaked away to reveal a crown turned upside down, wrapped in thorn vines. The sight made Julian's scent sharpen beneath the stone, winter cedar, and smoke suddenly edged with something cold enough to raise goose bumps along my arms. That is not my seal, he said. I stared at it. A memory from the novel clicked into place. The Royal Council had ruled Northmere after Julian's death through a regency seal, a temporary mark supposedly created to protect the kingdom until the throne stabilized. The book had presented it as lawful, necessary, maybe even noble. But here it was, carved into the king's coffin like a hand over his mouth. Victor's regency seal, I said. Outside, the prayer changed. The rhythm quickened. The mark on my wrist burned hotter, and my vision blurred at the edges. Dawn was closer than I thought. If the prayer finished, the seal would renew. Julian would sleep again. I would become the offering the book dismissed in one sentence. My whole body trembled, but my fear finally sharpened into anger. I had not been carried across worlds, placed into a forgotten body, and locked beside a living king just to help the men outside finish their lie. Tell me what to do, I said. Your blood woke the tomb, Julian answered. Your choice must break it. That sounded too large, too impossible. I was not a warrior. I was not a mage. In my old world, I had been someone who forgot laundry in the dryer and reheated coffee twice before noon. In this world, I was an Omega sacrifice with shaking hands and no one outside the door willing to say my name like it mattered. But maybe choice did not need to look powerful. Maybe it only needed to be mine. I pressed my injured palm against the inverted crown. The seal reacted instantly, cold biting up my arm. The silver cord tightened around my wrists, trying to pull me back. Outside, Victor's voice rose above the others. Hold the prayer. The offering is resisting. My breath stopped. He knew. He could feel the seal weakening. Panic lunged through me, but beneath it came Julian's voice, steady despite the stone between us. Caleb, my name in his mouth, sounded unlike the palace version. Not a command. Not a label. An anchor. Do not let them borrow your fear. My fingers flattened against the seal. My name is Caleb Miller. I whispered, and the tomb shivered. The mark on my wrist flared. I spoke louder. I am not an offering. The silver cord snapped loose from one wrist with a soft crack. The prayer outside faltered. I am not sacred because they can use me. The second cord loosened. The inverted crown beneath my palms split down the center, silver light pouring through the crack. I heard Victor shout outside, no longer calm, no longer holy. The coffin lid shifted again, this time with strength behind it. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might shake apart, but I kept my hand on the seal until the upside-down crown dissolved completely. The blue candles turned white. The tomb walls brightened, revealing one final line of hidden script above the coffin. Mate blood opens what traitor hands sealed. I read it once, twice, and understood why my blood had mattered, why the tomb had answered, why Julian had known me before I knew myself. They had not chosen me because I was disposable. They had chosen me because I was dangerous to the lie. The stone lid moved another inch, and through the widening gap, silver gray eyes opened beneath the shadow of black armor. Julian looked at me from inside the coffin, weak but awake, ancient power held behind a gaze that saw me too clearly. There you are, he said, as if I had not just arrived, as if some part of him had been waiting in the dark for years. My knees finally gave out, but this time I did not fall backward toward the slab. I sank beside the coffin with my freed hands pressed to the broken seal, breathing hard, alive, and no longer certain the story could contain what we had just changed. Julian Blackwood's eyes were not the eyes of a dead man. They were silver gray, clear beneath the shadow of the coffin, and so focused on me that the rest of the tomb seemed to disappear around the force of his gaze. My hands were still pressed against the broken Regency seal, my breath coming too fast, my wrists marked where the silver cords had fallen away. I should have moved back. Every instinct in this Omega body knew the danger of a powerful alpha waking inches away from me after 7 years of silence. My muscles locked. My throat closed. But Julian did not reach for me. He did not command me closer. He only looked at my shaking hands, the small line across my palm, the white robe the palace had dressed me in, and something in his expression darkened with quiet understanding. "They sent you inbound," he said, his voice rough as stone dragged across memory. It was not a question. Shame rose inside me before I could stop it. Old Caleb's shame, the kind trained into the body until being used felt like something to apologize for. They called it an honor. Julian's gaze lifted to mine. It was not. 2 simple words, and my chest hurt as if someone had touched a bruise I had forgotten was there. Outside the tomb, Victor Hayes shouted another order, but the stone door held shut. The council's prayer had broken. The tomb no longer listened to them. It listened to the blood on my palm, to the shattered seal under my fingers, to the king beneath the coffin lid who was breathing more strongly with every passing second. Julian placed one hand against the inside of the stone cover. His black armor gleamed faintly under the silver candles, old but untouched by dust, as if time had circled him without ever being allowed to land. The lid shifted another few inches, and the scent that had only whispered before now moved through the chamber like winter smoke and dark cedar after rain. My body reacted instantly. My shoulders loosened and tensed at the same time. My heartbeat stumbled. Something inside me answered him with a strange, aching recognition, not romantic, not simple, but deeper than logic. Like a locked room in my chest had heard footsteps outside. I pressed one hand against my ribs, frightened by my own reaction. "Do not let the bond decide for you," Julian said. My eyes snapped to his. "You can feel it." "Yes." His voice was quieter now. "But feeling a bond is not the same as owning a choice." The words unsettled me more than any command could have. This world had tied me, dressed me, named me offering, and sealed me in darkness. Yet the king everyone feared was the first person inside it to tell me I still had a choice. My vision blurred for 1 second, and I hated how close I came to crying. The coffin lid moved again, but then the carvings along its side flared blue. Julian's jaw tightened. The broken Regency seal had cracked the first layer, but more binding runes still wrapped the coffin like invisible chains made of prayer. I could see them now, thin lines of light crawling across the stone. One line pulsed in time with the mark on my wrist, and I understood before he said anything. I was still connected to the ritual. The tomb had been built to use me even after I resisted. "What do they need from me?" I whispered. Julian's eyes followed the line of blue light from the coffin to my wrist. "Your fear, your submission, your silence. The ritual feeds on consent they forced you to imitate." Cold spread through me. That was why the prayers called me sacred. Why the council said offering instead of prisoner. Why Victor had smiled so gently. The magic did not only need my blood. It needed the story that I had accepted my place. My hands curled against the stone. Then how do I stop giving it that? Julian studied me for a long breath. "Say what they never allowed you to say." Outside, something struck the stone door once, not enough to break it, but enough to make dust drift from the ceiling. Victor's voice came through, controlled again, which somehow made it worse. "Caleb, listen to me. The king is confused. His curse is using your fear. Step away from the coffin, and the council will protect you." Protect. The word almost made me laugh. My body remembered that word in Victor's mouth. Protection had meant locked rooms. Protection had meant silver lessons. Protection had meant being fed and clothed until the palace could spend me cleanly. The mark on my wrist warmed, tempted by the old habit of obedience. For one heartbeat, I almost stepped back. Then Julian shifted inside the coffin, and his hand appeared through the gap, palm up, stopping short of mine. He did not grab. He did not pull. He waited. "You do not have to touch me," he said. "But if you choose to, the bond may help carry your voice." I stared at his hand. Large, steady, gloved in worn black leather, waiting with more respect than the entire palace had given this body in years. My fingers trembled as I placed my hand in his. The moment our palms met, the tomb brightened. Not violently, not loudly, like dawn had remembered how to enter stone. My breath caught, but this time it did not vanish. It deepened. The mark on my wrist burned once, then cooled. I turned toward the sealed door and Victor's waiting voice beyond it. My knees still shook. My chest still ached. I was still afraid. But fear was no longer the only thing speaking through me. "I do not accept the ritual," I said. The blue runes on the coffin flickered. Julian's hand stayed steady under mine. I spoke louder, letting the tomb, the council, and the body that had been trained to survive in silence hear every word. "I do not accept being buried for your peace. I do not accept being named sacred so you can use me. I do not accept a duty I never chose." The final binding rune cracked across the coffin lid in a bright silver line. Outside, the council fell silent. Julian's fingers tightened only enough to anchor me, and the stone cover shifted aside at last. He rose slowly from the coffin, tall, armored, and impossibly alive, the silver candlelight catching on his dark hair and the sharp lines of his face. He looked unsteady for 1 second, 7 years of binding weighing on his body. But when Victor shouted from beyond the door, Julian stepped in front of me without hesitation. Not as an owner, not as a savior claiming a prize, as a shield choosing where to stand. His voice filled the tomb, low and absolute. "The offering is over." Then he turned his head just enough for his silver-gray eyes to meet mine. "Caleb Miller is my mate, but more than that, he is the witness you failed to silence." Julian's words settled into the tomb like a royal seal pressed into wax, and for one breath, even the stone door seemed to understand that the old order had cracked. "The offering is over." My body wanted to believe him so badly it hurt. But outside the chamber, Lord Victor Hayes was still there, and so was the council, and so were years of law, prayer, and polished lies built around the idea that someone like me could be spent quietly for the kingdom's comfort. Julian stood between me and the sealed door, tall in black armor, his crimson cloak hanging faded but still regal from one shoulder. He looked like a king pulled out of legend, but I could see the cost in the small things, the slight tremor in his left hand, the way his breathing caught after every few words, the shadows beneath his silver-gray eyes. 7 years inside a magical prison had not broken his authority, but it had taken something from his body. My chest tightened with a strange ache that did not belong to fear alone. "You are weak," I whispered before I could stop myself. He turned his head toward me, and for a second I expected pride, offense, the cold dismissal powerful men used when weakness was named. Instead, his mouth curved with the smallest tired edge. "Yes." The honesty startled me. He glanced at the coffin behind him, where the last silver runes still flickered across the stone like dying stars. The funeral was not a funeral. It was a binding ceremony hidden under mourning. The council told the kingdom I fell to the royal curse. Then they sealed me here with the language of grief. My skin went cold. The book had described his death as tragic, mysterious, useful for the plot. The lonely Alpha King lost before the story began. A shadow over Northmere. But the book had been written from the winner's version of history. Victor's version. Why? I asked, though some part of me already knew. Julian's scent darkened, winter smoke curling through the blue candle air. Because I refused to sign the Protection Act. The name sounded gentle, almost noble, and that made my stomach twist. I had already learned what palace words could hide. Protection, offering, duty. Julian's gaze moved to the torn silver cords. On the floor near my feet. It would have allowed the Royal Council to classify low-status Omegas as ritual dependents of the crown. They said it was for safety, for food, housing, medical care. But the law turned people into tools the palace could assign, bind, and dispose of through ceremony. My throat tightened around Caleb Miller's old memories. White rooms, scent lessons, careful meals, adults praising obedience. I pressed one hand against my wrist where the ritual mark had cooled but not vanished. They passed it anyway. After they buried me. The The simple answer made the tomb feel colder. Outside, Victor's voice had dropped into quiet discussion with the others, no longer chanting, no longer certain. I heard fragments through the stone. Unstable. Curse distortion. Delay until dawn. They were already rebuilding their lie. My fingers curled against my robe. And me? I asked. Why was I chosen? Julian did not answer immediately, and that silence frightened me more than the truth might have. He stepped closer to the coffin and touched the moon rose carving where my blood had awakened the seal. Silver light pulsed once beneath his fingers. Because your scent could either strengthen the prison or break it, he said. They must have discovered your bond signature years ago. I shook my head. This body was an orphan. A palace Omega. No family. No title. That is what they named you after they erased the rest. The tomb tilted around me. For a second, I heard rain against the window from my old apartment, saw the cheap blanket over my knees, the words of the novel glowing on my phone screen. That life had felt ordinary, lonely sometimes, but mine. Now Julian was looking at me like it might have been something else. A hiding place. A wound sealed so well I had mistaken it for a beginning. I came from another world, I said quietly. The words should have been impossible, but the tomb did not reject them. The bond between us warmed under my ribs, patient and painful. I remember living somewhere else. I remember reading about Northmere like it was fiction. Julian's eyes softened with grief he did not try to use against me. Then they did not only seal my body. They scattered your soul far enough that even the bond could not reach you until the ritual weakened. My breath stopped. No. Yes. I did not know which answer hurt more. Memories flickered inside me, not fully formed, just sensations. A chapel floor under my knees. A younger version of Julian waiting with his hand open. Moonrose light around our palms. Then darkness splitting like glass. I staggered, and Julian moved as if to catch me, then stopped himself with visible effort. Waiting. Always waiting for me to choose. That restraint broke something open in my chest. I reached for his arm myself, gripping the cold armor at his wrist, and his whole body went still beneath my hand. If I was yours before, I said, voice shaking. I do not remember enough to know what that means now. Then it means nothing. You do not choose again. His answer came too quickly to be performance, too quiet to be acclaim. I know what the bond calls you. I know what I lost. But I will not make your confusion another prison. The ache behind my eyes burned. In this world, everyone had been so ready to define me. Offering, Omega, tool, sacred duty, lost mate. Julian was the first to let a name wait for my consent. Before I could answer, the stone door glowed with Victor's Regency seal, and his voice came through the chamber, smooth again, careful again, dangerous because it sounded reasonable. Your Majesty, if you are truly awake, let the council assist you. The Omega is confused by tomb magic. Step away from him, and we can restore order. Julian looked at the seal on the door, then at me. He will try to make you the cause of my instability. Because if I am just confused, I whispered, then nothing I say matters. Julian nodded once. And if I am still cursed, then nothing I say matters either. My fear returned, but it was no longer empty. It had edges now, direction. Then we need proof. Julian's gaze moved to the wall behind the coffin, where the broken runes had revealed a narrow line of hidden script. There is a tomb memory sealed under the final prayer. It will show who placed me here and who marked you for the ritual. My pulse jumped. How do we open it? He looked at my hand on his armor, then back to my face. Together. Only if you choose. Outside, Victor began ordering the door unsealed. Inside, the tomb waited, silver candles trembling. I was still terrified. I was still unsure which memories were mine and which had been returned from a life stolen before I understood it. But I knew one thing with sudden clarity. The palace had called this place a grave because it wanted truth to stay buried. I looked at Julian and tightened my grip. Open it. The tomb memory, opened like the stone itself, was learning how to breathe. Silver light rose from the hidden script behind Julian's coffin, spreading over the walls in thin lines that looked like cracks in a frozen lake. Julian stood beside me, one hand braced against the coffin because his body was still carrying 7 years of forced sleep, while my fingers remained wrapped around the cold edge of his armor by choice. The distinction mattered. In this place, where every prayer had been built to make obedience look beautiful, choosing even a small touch felt like reclaiming part of myself. Outside the stone door, Victor's regency seal glowed brighter as his people worked to open it. Inside, the tomb answered us first. The silver lines gathered into a circle above the floor, and the air filled with images, not flat like paintings, but living memories made from moonlight and grief. I saw the throne room 7 years ago. Julian stood before the council in black armor, younger but no less controlled, his voice cold as he refused to sign the Protection Act. I saw Victor Hayes smiling from the side of the room, hands folded, eyes patient. I saw council elders pretending disappointment while guards sealed the doors. Then the scene shifted to the funeral. Northmere had mourned a king who was not dead. I watched people kneel in the streets with candles, watched black banners fall from palace towers, watched Victor place a crown of white roses on an empty coffin while the real Julian, already bound by regency magic, was carried below the palace into the tomb. My stomach turned. The lie had not been hidden in darkness. It had been displayed in public until everyone called it truth. The memory shifted again, and this time I saw myself. Not the frightened offering in a white robe. Not the person from my apartment in another world. Another me, younger, standing in a chapel washed with dawn. My hair was the same soft brown, my eyes the same wide green, but there was confidence there I did not recognize yet. Julian stood across from me, his hand open and waiting. The moonrose bond glowed between us when I touched him. No chains, no orders, just a vow spoken in two voices. Protection before bond, choice before claim, truth before crown. My breath caught so sharply it hurt. That was real, I whispered. Julian's face was turned toward the memory, and the grief in his eyes made him look less like a legend and more like a man forced to watch his own heart being removed by law. Yes, the image fractured. Victor entered the chapel later with 3 council elders and a silver bowl filled with black water. I saw the same bond light pulled from my chest in threads, not as an injury the memory needed to show with blood or pain, but as something sacred being stolen quietly under official seals. My younger self collapsed into sleep. Victor touched my forehead with 2 fingers and spoke a command that echoed through the tomb. Send the soul beyond reach. Leave the body useful. The words entered me like cold through glass. My memories of another world flashed in response. City rain, traffic, coffee, my small apartment, late nights reading about a lonely kingdom I thought someone else had invented. I had not escaped there by accident. Part of me had been hidden there because Northmere had no place left where I could not be used. Julian's hand moved closer to mine, then stopped, waiting. My chest ached, and I chose to take it. His fingers closed gently around mine, steadying but not trapping, while the memory continued. The body left behind became Caleb Miller, Palace Orphan, Grave Omega, Sacred Offering. Years passed in moments. White rooms, silver lessons, ritual prayers, Victor's careful voice shaping fear into gratitude. Finally, the memory showed tonight. The council lowering me into the tomb, Victor placing the regency seal on the door, and a hidden line of magic, connecting my wrist mark to the final prayer carved under the coffin. That was the last binding. Not the broken seal at the foot, not the stone lid. The prayer itself. The prayer binds you by my erased name, I said, understanding coming all at once. They removed your true royal name from the ceremony and replaced it with Dead King. Julian nodded slowly. A king without a true name cannot answer law. A mate without memory cannot answer bond. My mouth went dry. In the novel, Julian's full name had appeared only once, in an old coronation passage I had almost skipped. Julian Elias Blackwood. The name rose in my mind with sudden clarity, bright and dangerous. The ritual mark on my wrist sensed it too. It flared with cold warning, and I doubled over, breath catching. Julian's grip stayed steady, not pulling, only holding until I could stand again. You do not have to do this, he said, though the door behind us glowed hotter, though Victor's voice outside had become sharper, though dawn was closing around us like a fist. I looked at the memory of my younger self in the chapel, at the stolen bond, at the offering robe brushing my ankles. I was terrified, but for the first time, the fear had to stand beside anger, and anger was stronger than I expected. If I do not say it, I whispered, they get to keep naming both of us. I stepped toward the hidden prayer carved into the floor around the coffin. The words glowed blue, still repeating the council's lie. May the dead king rest. May the offering settle. May the crown remain guided. My hand shook as I pressed my palm to the first line. The tomb went silent. Outside, Victor shouted for the seal to be forced open, but his voice sounded far away now. I drew a breath that tasted like dust, roses, and winter smoke. Julian Elias Blackwood, I said. The entire tomb answered. The blue prayer cracked into silver. The mark on my wrist burned bright, then split open like a lock, finally admitting it had never been a vow. I kept speaking, louder this time, my voice shaking but mine. He is not dead. I am not an offering. The crown was not guided. It was stolen. The final prayer shattered beneath my hand. Silver light rushed. Up the walls, across the coffin, through the candles, and into the sealed door. Julian staggered, and I caught his arm before thinking, as if my body had remembered what partnership felt like before my mind caught up. The door groaned, not opening yet, revealing. On its inner surface, moonlight formed Victor's Regency seal, his signature, and the names of every council elder who had bound the king under a false funeral. Proof. Public proof waiting on stone. Julian looked at the door, then at me, and the air between us felt different now. Not easy, not healed, but no longer buried. When that door opens, he said quietly, they will try to call you confused, cursed, dangerous. My hands were still trembling. My throat hurt from the name I had spoken, but my voice did not disappear. Then let them try, I said. This time the tomb remembers with me. The stone door did not open all at once. It breathed first, a deep, grinding sound moving through the tomb as silver light spread across its surface, exposing Victor's Regency seal, his signature, and the names of the council elders like truth written in moonlight. My whole body shook as I stood beside Julian, one hand still near his arm, the other pressed against my aching wrist where the ritual mark had split. The offering robe clung coldly to my skin, white and silver, and too beautiful for what it had been made to mean. Outside, the council had gone silent. That silence frightened me more than their prayers had. Prayers made them predictable. Silence meant they were choosing a new lie. Julian's breathing was steady beside me, but I could feel the strain in him, the exhaustion hidden under that black armor and royal control. 7 years of binding had left him standing, not whole. The thought tightened my chest. He had stepped between me and the door without hesitation, but I was beginning to understand protection could become another kind of disappearance if I let him stand alone while I hid behind him. The door shifted open by a few inches, and cold dawn air slipped into the tomb. Victor Hayes stood beyond it, dressed in formal black with the council's silver chain across his chest, his face pale but composed. Behind him were elders, guards, and attendants who had come to witness a completed ritual and instead found a living king. Victor's eyes moved first to Julian, then to me, then to the glowing proof on the stone door. For 1 second, his calm face hardened. Then he smiled softly, as if this were a misunderstanding at a dinner table. Your Majesty, he said, lowering himself into a careful bow. Thank the crown. The ritual has awakened your spirit enough to speak. We feared the Omega's fear might disturb your rest. My stomach turned. Even now, with proof glowing behind him, he was trying to make reality bend around his voice. Julian's scent went cold, but Victor did not stop. He looked at me with the same gentle expression old Caleb had been trained to trust. Caleb, step away from him. Tomb magic is confusing you. You have done your sacred duty. No one will punish you for being overwhelmed. Sacred duty. The phrase scraped across my nerves. I felt the old shape of obedience rise, not because I believed him, but because this body had survived years by responding before thinking. My shoulders wanted to curve inward. My eyes wanted to lower. The split mark on my wrist pulsed with phantom heat, remembering the cage even after the lock broke. Julian moved slightly, ready to stand fully in front of me, but I touched his cloak before he could. He stopped. That tiny pause gave me room to speak. Do not call it sacred, I said. My voice was rough, but it did not vanish. Victor's smile remained, though his eyes cooled. You are exhausted. I am awake. The words startled the council more than I expected. A few elders shifted. Someone behind Victor whispered my name like they had forgotten I owned one. Victor sighed, patient and disappointed. You were raised under royal protection, fed by the palace, educated by the palace, prepared for a role few Omegas would be worthy to fulfill. If you reject that now, What do you think happens to every protected Omega after you? There it was. Not a threat shaped like anger, but a threat shaped like responsibility. My chest tightened because I understood what he meant. If I spoke, he would blame me for every consequence. If I resisted, he would say I had endangered people like me. He would turn other Omegas into hostages without even bringing them into the room. You mean the others you prepared for tombs? I said quietly. Victor's expression did not change fast enough. I saw the answer before he denied it. My stomach dropped. There were others. Not just me. Not just one offering accepted before dawn. The ritual had a system beneath it, a line of bodies kept breathing until needed. Julian's voice lowered beside me. How many? Victor looked at him, and the softness finally thinned. Your Majesty, Northmere survived 7 years because the Council made difficult choices while you were unavailable. Unavailable. The word hit the tomb like a slap. Julian had been sealed under stone, his name removed from law, his body turned into a symbol, and Victor called it unavailable. My fear sharpened into anger, so clean it almost steadied me. Victor turned back to me and softened his voice again. Caleb, listen carefully. If you stand with me now, I can protect you from the court. You will not return to the tomb. You can live in the palace as a sacred Omega, honored, dressed well, kept safe. No more cold rooms. No more hunger. No more fear. For a second, old Caleb's memories answered him. Stiff bread, thin blankets, longing for one adult to choose him gently. A softer room. A prettier collar. A grave with windows. My fingers trembled. Julian said nothing. He did not interrupt the offer. He let me hear it fully so my refusal could belong to me. I looked at Victor, at the man who thought comfort could erase consent. A beautiful cage is still a cage. His face changed. Not dramatically. Not enough for everyone to see. But enough for me. Then you choose uncertainty, he said. I choose myself. The tomb flared silver at the words. The proof on the door brightened, and a hidden panel near the threshold opened with a soft click. Inside lay a small black ring set with a Regency stone, glowing with the same seal as the binding on Julian's coffin. Victor's gaze snapped toward it. Too late. I stepped forward and picked it up with trembling fingers. The stone responded to my split ritual mark, and the tomb wall lit with one final image. Victor pressing that ring to the coffin seal, speaking the first false funeral oath, and naming me as the future offering before I had ever been old enough to understand what that meant. The council saw it. The guards saw it. Julian saw it. Victor's mouth opened, but no polished sentence came out. For the first time, the man who had taught the palace how to bury truth had nothing ready. I held the ring against my palm, feeling the proof pulse like a second heartbeat. Dawn light widened through the door behind him. The memorial outside was about to begin, but the lie had already started falling apart. The memorial bells began ringing above us before anyone found the courage to speak. Their sound rolled down through the tomb passage in slow golden waves, meant to tell the kingdom that the offering had been accepted, the dead king had been honored, and Northmere could continue pretending its peace had not been purchased with buried names. I stood at the open tomb door with Victor's Regency ring clenched in my palm, my wrist still aching where the ritual mark had split, while dawn light stretched across the stone floor and touched Julian's black armor for the first time in 7 years. The council elders beyond the doorway looked trapped between fear and calculation. They had come below ground to manage a ceremony. They had found the ceremony staring back at them with proof in its hand. Victor recovered first because men like him never seemed to run out of new lies. Close the door, he ordered the guards, voice low and controlled. His Majesty is not stable. The tomb has released an echo, not a king. No one moved. The guards looked at Julian, then at the glowing proof on the tomb wall, then at the ring in my hand. For the first time, Victor's command did not become action. I felt that shift in the air like the first crack in a frozen river. Julian stepped forward, and the elders drew back as if history itself had walked out of the dark. He moved slowly, not because he lacked authority, but because his body was still relearning daylight. Every step carried pain he refused to display. Every breath sounded measured. But when he reached the threshold, he placed himself between Victor and me again, not hiding me from the court, but making it clear no one would reach me without facing the crown first. Open the upper gates, Julian said. His voice was rough, but it filled the passage with a command that needed no ornament. The memorial will continue. Victor's face tightened. Your Majesty, that would be unwise. Julian looked at him. For whom? No one answered. We climbed from the tomb passage into the memorial courtyard, and the world above felt almost unreal. Hundreds of nobles, servants, guards, and city representatives had gathered beneath black banners and white funeral flowers. A marble platform stood before the sealed royal crypt, prepared for Victor to announce that the ritual had succeeded. The people expected a dead king's name. They expected a faceless Omega offering. They expected the same lie in prettier words. Instead, the crypt doors opened, and Julian Blackwood walked out alive. The bells faltered one by one until silence fell over the courtyard. I walked beside him in the white offering robe, still barefoot, still shaking, with the Regency ring held against my chest. For a heartbeat, every eye landed on me, and the old fear tried to rise. Grave Omega, sacred duty, useful offering. But Julian removed his faded crimson cloak and placed it over my shoulders in front of the entire kingdom. The fabric was heavy, warm from him, and unmistakably royal. Gasps broke across the courtyard. Victor stepped onto the platform quickly, trying to reclaim the story before it escaped him. People of Northmere, remain calm. The tomb has produced an unstable manifestation through ritual magic. The Omega beside it is under the influence of old bond residue. It, not him. Even now, he tried to turn Julian into a phenomenon and me into a symptom. My hands trembled under the cloak, but I stepped forward before Julian could answer for me. The movement pulled every gaze back to my face. If I am only confused, I said, my voice carrying through the cold morning air, then let the tomb memory speak. I lifted the Regency ring. The stone inside it flashed silver, answering the split mark on my wrist and the glowing proof still carved into the open tomb door behind us. Light rose above the courtyard, forming the image everyone below had seen. Victor sealing Julian beneath the false funeral oath, placing the Regency ring against the coffin, and naming Caleb Miller as the future offering years before I ever entered the tomb. The courtyard went silent in a different way now. Not shocked. Understanding. The worst kind of silence for a liar. Victor's face drained of color, but I was not done. He did not die 7 years ago, I said, turning to the crowd, to the servants near the back, to the Omegas in pale ceremonial coats standing beside the healers with the same frightened posture this body remembered. He was sealed, and I was not honored. I was prepared. We were both turned into pieces of a law no one was allowed to question. Julian stepped beside me, not in front this time, and raised one hand. Captain Aaron Reed, commander of the Tomb Guard, moved immediately. He took the ring from me with a cloth, held it high for the royal witnesses, and announced, "The Regency seal matches the binding mark on the tomb. The evidence is valid under royal memory law." That was the moment Victor lost the crowd. Not all at once, not with shouting, but through the visible withdrawal of belief. Nobles stepped away from him. Guards lowered their hands from his side. Council elders looked down at the platform as if the marble had become safer than his face. Victor tried one last time. "Everything I did preserved this kingdom." Julian's silver-gray eyes turned cold enough to quiet the courtyard. "You preserved your power with stolen grief and stolen lives." Then he looked at the guards. "Lord Victor Hayes is stripped of council authority until formal judgment. The Regency is dissolved. The memorial is over." Aaron Reed and the royal guards surrounded Victor, not with chaos, not with cruelty, but with public law. His chain of office was removed in front of everyone, and the sound of silver links leaving his shoulders felt louder than the bells had. As they led him away, his eyes found mine, and for once there was no gentle smile, no careful pity, no pretty cage being offered. Only fury that I had not remained the sentence he wrote for me. Julian turned back to the crowd, his cloak now resting on my shoulders, his own armor exposed to the morning cold. "Caleb Miller is not an offering," he said, each word clear. "He is my mate, my witness, and the reason this crown stands here alive." My chest tightened at mate, but before the word could become another chain, Julian looked at me in front of them all and added, "And no bond, not even mine, will decide his place without his consent." The courtyard blurred at the edges, not from magic, from the sudden, almost unbearable feeling of being named and freed in the same breath. The people had come to watch a tomb stay closed. Instead, they watched the dead king return with the sacrifice standing beside him, wearing the royal cloak not as a shroud, but as proof that I had walked out. The memorial courtyard became a courtroom before the bells finished dying. No one returned to the palace hall because Julian refused to let the truth be carried somewhere cleaner, somewhere polished enough for the council to edit what the people had already seen. The black funeral banners still hung above us, white flowers still covered the marble steps, and the royal tomb stood open behind my back like a witness that had waited 7 years to speak. Victor Hayes stood between two royal guards with his council chain gone, his face stripped of the gentle patience he had used to dress control as mercy. Around us gathered everyone who had once looked through me. Nobles who had called me grave Omega, servants who had prepared my offering robe with lowered eyes, elders who had blessed the ritual, and the other protected Omegas brought from the lower palace when Julian ordered every sealed file opened. I saw them near the east archway, wrapped in plain cloaks, frightened and silent. Some had collars like mine. Some had white ceremonial cuffs. Some were so young their fear looked more like confusion than grief. My chest tightened until breathing hurt. I had thought the tomb was my ending, but it had only been one room in a much larger prison. Captain Aaron Reed placed Victor's Regency ring on a silver stand. Before the crowd, royal historian Ethan Brooks, summoned from the archive with ink still on his hands, opened a black ledger sealed under the same crest. His voice shook at first, but grew steadier as he read. False funeral authorization. Binding prayer draft. Protection Act enforcement list. Omega offering schedule. A murmur of horror moved through the courtyard. Ethan turned the final page and held it up. My name appeared there, not as a person, but as ritual asset for year 7. Beneath mine were more names, each marked with a date, a scent classification, and a council signature. Victor looked away. That small movement was more damning than any confession. Then the tomb door answered the ledger. Silver light rose across the stone, replaying the final memory one more time for the public witnesses. Victor sealing Julian beneath a false funeral oath, removing the king's true name from law, and marking me years in advance as the offering that would renew the prison. No one could call it rumor. No one could call it confusion. The tomb, the ring, the ledger, and the memory all spoke the same truth. Victor's power had not protected Northmere. It had hidden a living king and built peace from stolen consent. Julian stepped forward, still pale from the broken seal, but the courtyard bent around his authority like it had been waiting to remember him. Victor tried to speak over him. Everything was done to preserve order. Julian removed the royal signet from his own hand and placed it beside the ledger. The sound of metal touching silver silenced the courtyard. Then let order answer to law, he said. Lord Victor Hayes is stripped of title, inheritance, council authority, and access to royal office. Every elder who signed this ledger is removed pending public judgment. Every ritual collar and offering contract is void. Every Omega named here is under crown protection until they choose their own future. The guards did not drag Victor away. They did something worse for a man like him. They waited while his own house attendants stepped back, while the council elders refused to meet his eyes, while the crowd watched him become exactly what he had made others feel. Unsupported, exposed, and no longer believed. When Aaron escorted him from the platform, Victor looked at me with fury, but there was no power left inside it. Julian moved then, placing himself at my side and slightly before me as several elders began protesting that the mate bond had compromised his judgment. He did not raise his voice. He lifted the signet and set it in my hands before the entire courtyard. If you question my judgment because I protect Caleb Miller, then question the tomb, the ledger, the Regency ring, and the vow you tried to erase. I do not protect him because the bond commands me. I protect him because this crown failed him before he ever entered that tomb. The words struck the air so clearly that I felt them in my ribs. But this was the dangerous moment, the one where protection could become another name for being carried into someone else's story. My fingers closed around the signet, heavy and warm from his hand. Then I stepped out from behind his shoulder. My knees trembled. My throat burned. I was still wearing the offering robe beneath his cloak, still barefoot on cold marble, still frightened of all the eyes that had once watched me disappear. But when I spoke, the courtyard listened. I will not forgive this kingdom today, I said. I will not become a romantic miracle that makes the offering system easier to forget. I choose to remain in Northmere, but not as a hidden mate, not as a sacred symbol, and not as proof that suffering was worth it. I choose to open every sealed file. I choose to help every Omega named in that ledger decide where they want to go. And if I stand beside Julian Blackwood, it will be because I choose that place again, not because a tomb, a law, or a bond puts me there. Silence followed. Then Julian bowed his head to me in front of the entire kingdom, not as a king accepting obedience, but as a man accepting my terms. Then the crown will wait for your choice, he said. And until then, Caleb Miller is recognized as royal mate, witness of the sealed tomb, and equal partner in the decree ending the offering law. 6 weeks later, the tomb no longer smelled like dust and cold candles. Its doors stayed open. During the day, not as a shrine to grief, but as a public record. The silver cords had been melted into nameplates for the new sanctuary wing, where the former protected Omegas chose their own rooms, their own work, their own names. Ethan Brooks taught me how to read the old royal scripts. Aaron Reed trained new guards to protect people instead of rituals. Julian walked with me through the courtyard every morning, never taking my hand unless I offered it first, never asking the bond to answer questions I was still learning how to ask myself. Some days I remembered my other world like rain against glass. Some days I remembered the chapel vow like a light returning through stone. Both were mine now. At the first public decree signing, I wore cream and silver by choice, not as an offering robe, and when I placed my name beside Julian's, the court stood because I had entered the tomb as something the palace thought it could spend, but I remained as the person even the crown had to ask, hear, and recognize.